What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 9 wildcard guide. So we're going to go through some of the big topics that you've put to me on Twitter. Things like whether you should be saving it till Game Week 13, who the third striker should be, what to do about defenders, Trent, Cancelo, James and Trippier, players like that, what the Arsenal and Man City strategy is with the blank, and lots of other stuff as well. So if you enjoyed the video and you find it useful, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. And before we talk about the Game Week 9 stuff, let's talk about why you might want to save your wildcard for Game Week 13. So the obvious one is that your team is well set up for Game Weeks 9 to 12. I actually put a tweet out earlier asking people to send me their teams if they were thinking of using their wildcard. So we'll go through one of them in a minute. It also allows you to deal with the Arsenal and Man City blank in Game Week 12 a lot easier because you can essentially sell players knowing that you can get them back. Now, there's obviously going to be some players that you don't want to sell because of value tied up in them. But let's say you've got like 4 or 5 of them right now and you're happy to keep for 1 to 2 game weeks. You could then use transfers to get rid of them, then wildcard them back in. You can also then make the decision about Liverpool players, whether to bring them back in Game Week 9 right now. So Salah and Trent are the big ones that people are looking at. Or you could delay it until Game Week 12, knowing that you've got those extra transfers to use to shift funds from Man City and Arsenal players to Liverpool players. So it gives you maybe a little bit more flexibility. I think people that are wildcarding in Game Week 9 will probably side more with getting them in right now. You could possibly look to wait. I think people did look at wildcarding in Game Week 12 to get the Liverpool players in. The problem if you do that now is you're going to want Arsenal and Man City players afterwards, but they blank. So I think you've got to hold it until Game Week 13. So if you are going to save it till then, think about when and if you're going to get your Liverpool players back in. The best captain in Game Week 11 is probably Harry Kane. You could go for Son as well if you're confident about him starting that game. I don't expect him to, be on the bench for a lot of games going forward now, but obviously he is a slight minutes risk. But they play Everton at home in the same week that Liverpool play Man City. So it might be worth going for a Spurs player if you're not comfortable going with Mitrovic against Bournemouth at home. And because you're not then worried about whether you've got Salah in your team, whether you've got whoever else it might be from Arsenal or Man City, because you know you can wildcard, you can concentrate on using your transfers to get the best captain in for 11, make sure you're sorted for 12, and then after that it doesn't matter because you're going to wildcard anyway. I would definitely think about Man City, Arsenal and Liverpool players in particular because their fixtures are very good from Game Week 13 to 16. So Man City have Brighton at home, Leicester away, Fulham at home, Brentford at home. You're probably going to want at least Haaland and Cancelo, maybe another defender or maybe Phil Foden as well in midfield could be an option. Same with Arsenal, right? Some of us are going to sell our Arsenal players apart from possibly Martinelli because of the blank. But after that, Southampton away, Forest at home, Chelsea away, which isn't so good, and then Wolves away. You're probably going to want at least one more Arsenal player, possibly Saka, possibly Jesus. And then Liverpool, again, no matter what you think about them right now, Forest away, Leeds at home, Spurs away, and Southampton at home. So the Spurs away game is tough. The 3 games outside of that are really good. The only downside is, if you're wildcarding in 13, you're trying to make the most of 4 weeks. And if it doesn't pay off, you're going to be back to where everyone else is after that because we're all going to have unlimited transfers. So you're really hoping that these 3 teams primarily in those 4 fixtures really pay off for you. Bearing in mind that a lot of people are going to have 1 to 2 City anyway, 1 to 2 Liverpool and maybe 1 to 2 Arsenal. So it's not like you can get that much further ahead. But of course, if your team is well set up now, like this team, for example, that was sent to me on Twitter, you're probably okay, right? Let's say you've got 1 free transfer every week until Game Week 12. You could bench at least 2 of the Arsenal Man City players, so Haaland and possibly Martinelli, because that's who most people have got the most amount of value built up in. Jesus could go to Tony this week or Solanke. Next week you could get rid of Saliba. You keep Cancelo until Game Week 11 or 12, then you possibly sell him to maybe Reece James, and your team looks fine. So if your team is something like this, and you feel like you can get away with it from Game Weeks 9 to 12, you could absolutely hold on to the wild card. But if you want players in right now, like Trent, like Salah, you don't have them, and you want to get ahead of that blank for Arsenal or Man City, then wildcarding now is perfectly reasonable. So it's all going to be team dependent. I think some people can definitely put it off. It's going to depend how you want to handle that Man City Arsenal blank, really. So I think goalkeepers for Wildcard Game Week 9 are one of the more interesting discussions. Last week, most people went for Nick Pope. I probably would have done that as well. But there's a few more options this week. And there's so many, I'm going to try and go through them as quickly as possible. So the first one is whether you should go for Ward or Everson if this player is going to be on your bench. Now, it probably is worth assuming that Ward is still going to be the number one. No matter what we think, no matter what Leicester fans think, that Everson should be given a chance given how Ward has played. He has played all the games so far, and we should assume that's probably going to continue. Now, if you're going to have a main goalkeeper that you play every single week and the other one's just going to be on your bench, then maybe going for the one that's a little bit cheaper in Everson at 3.9 could be the way to go. And it's a little bit of a gamble that he will then win his place later on just in case you need them. If you're going to rotate, I think you still have to go for Ward at this point. The other option is to go for both of them, which I know sounds crazy given the amount of goals they've conceded, and I know people got burnt by it in game week 1, but they had pretty poor fixtures to start the season. I'm just looking at them here. They've already played Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, a really good Brighton team, and Spurs as well. If you look at the fixtures from kind of game weeks 9 to 16, the only real tough team they play is Man City at home. Outside of that, the fixtures are pretty good. It's an extremely cheap combination, and they have conceded 22 goals. Not great at all. It's absolutely rubbish record. 10.1 expected goals conceded is where they land. So I would say there's a combination that they've been a little bit unlucky, but also that Ward has just not been great at all. So if you don't think that he can turn that around, they're going to continue conceding at this rate. You absolutely should not go for Ward and Everson, but I wouldn't completely write it off. When you start trying to put in Cancelo and Trent and James and Maddison and Zaha and Salah, 3 forwards, it gets very tricky to afford that, and Ward and Everson might be the way you do it, and just hope they get a couple of clean sheets along the way, and that value for both of them being 7.9 million kind of comes through. But I can see why a lot of people won't want to do that. Mendy and Kepa I think you've got to ignore because we don't know who's first choice. You could go for both, but I feel like it's quite expensive. Mendy's 4.9, Kepa's 4.4. It's not the end of the world to have a guaranteed Chelsea goalkeeper for that price, and obviously you can link them with Reece James as well, but you do block that third Chelsea player. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not really looking at Sterling or Aubameyang or Mount, but I prefer to leave my options open rather than go for both Chelsea defenders. So unless one gets injured, and then we know for certain the other one is the number one, I don't think we can go there, because some people think it'll be Kepa, some people think it'll be Mendy. I'm just not sure it's worth it. Ideally, you see another game under Potter with both goalkeepers fit, and then you decide, but you don't have that luxury on Game Week 9 wildcard, so I think you probably have to ignore them. Pope is the one that a lot of people like, but when you look at his upcoming fixtures, Mitrovic in Game Week 9, who a lot of us are going to own and hope that he's going to score, so that could wipe out the clean sheet. I don't think Man United away in Game Week 11 or Spurs away in Game Week 13 are that great either. Then it's Chelsea at home in Game Week 16. So there are a few tricky fixtures that Newcastle have, and I would question whether a double up with Trippier. For those of you that just do not want to get rid of Trippier at all, is it worth having the double up from this week onwards? I'm not so sure about that. I think a lot of people picked Pope last week for very good reason because of the total fixture run from 8 to 16, the fact they had Bournemouth at home last week. But I think if you're going again this week, there'd be more of a conversation about whether he's the absolute one to go for. And at 5.2 million, and there are some other goalkeepers that are close to that, Fabianski and Sarr as well at 5 million, he's very close to the premium price. Someone like Alisson, Edison, for example. I know Edison's got a blank coming up, but he's getting close to that point now. And most of the time, we don't like to spend that kind of money on our goalkeepers. They do have pretty good expected goals conceded numbers outside of kind of Liverpool and Man City, where you'd expect them to concede lots of chances anyway. So they have done pretty well, and I wouldn't completely write off at 5.2, but if I want Trippier, I'm not sure I want the double up. So I don't know about Pope. I'm a little bit undecided about that. Fabianski, the most thing I was surprised about was their expected goals conceded per 90 minutes, West Ham, is 0.87. That's the third best this season, which I'm a little bit surprised about. They haven't had completely awful fixtures, but they've not been amazing either. So I think that's pretty decent. He's almost the same price as Pope, so if you are kind of tempted to go for the Newcastle man, the one that gets a lot of save points and then hopefully some clean sheets along the way, maybe the extra 0.2 million is worth it. The other thing I don't like about Fabianski is, if I'm looking for some cheap bench options on my wild card, Zuma at 4.5 is a cheaper way into that West Ham defence. So I don't hate Fabianski at all as an option, but I feel like if I had the choice between him and Zuma, I'd probably go for Zuma. From an FPL point of view only, of course, not from a real life point of view with Zuma. Then the last two, Aguaita. I've got slight doubts about whether Johnson could play at some point in a random game. Like, if Guaita has a little bit of a niggle, Crystal Palace do have some pretty good backup goalkeepers, and I don't think Vieira would be worried about playing him. He has played well so far, and he's played 90 minutes, obviously, in every single game so far. So he is the number one, but could he miss a random game? And if you pick the wrong Leicester defender, that could be slightly frustrating. So that's the only kind of worry I have with him. And obviously, if you do go for Everson, hoping that he wins his place back, and he doesn't, or gets the number one shirt and he doesn't, then you're stuck with Guaita, who might miss the odd game. I don't know how much to read into that. A lot of Crystal Palace fans think he will just play and that will be it. But it is a slight worry. I guess because we got unlimited transfers in Game Week 16, it's not that big of a deal because you can then switch goalkeepers again. It's just something to think about. But if his minutes are good, he is probably the best 4.5 million goalkeeper. And the other one is Jose Sarr, who a lot of people have said I've not mentioned enough. Very good fixtures from Game Week 11 onwards. The next two aren't ideal. Only 6 goals conceded so far, but I do worry whether Collins being out for the next 3 games might affect them a little bit. But if you are spending 5-ish million between Sarr, Pope and Fabianski, it's close. Maybe Jose Sarr is the one. So lots of questions about who the best third forward is. I think most people are going to go for Haaland and Mitrovic, so it's just about filling that third forward spot. And I think it's between Toney and Solanke, and I think it's as simple as this. When you build your draft and you consider any money you might need for future moves to bring in other players, do you have 7.2 million left over? If you do, you go for Toney. If you haven't got quite that much, you go for Solanke instead. I am looking at this third forward spot as a set and forget position. I'm wildcarding in Game Week 9. I'm rolling in Game Week 10. Game Week 11, I'm probably not going to want to move my third forward on already. Game Week 12, I've got an Arsenal and Man City blank to deal with, so I may take out one of the players that I own. If I do that, they've got good fixtures from Game Week 13 onwards, so I'm probably going to reverse that move. So we're already into Game Week 14 or 15 before I even possibly have a spare transfer to use on this position. So I want someone that's nailed on, going to play 80 to 90 minutes and has penalties, preferably. And that is Toney and Solanke. They both fit that bill. Now, Bournemouth will have a new manager, so all those things might not apply to Solanke, but I'm confident that they will. And I think at 5.7 million, yes, it's not very exciting to have a Bournemouth attacker, but if he blanks a few times, it's not the end of the world because he's enabling me to have bigger and better players elsewhere. So, of course, Toney is better. But if I don't have enough money, I'm perfectly okay with going with Solanke. I think if you're comparing Toney to Isak and Bamford, I wish Bamford was an option. He'd be a massive differential. I think he'll score plenty of goals in those fixtures, but he has been a fitness concern so far this season. And even with the international break to build that fitness up, I'm just not confident enough in going there, especially when transfers are going to be really precious up until Game Week 16. I don't want to have to use one necessarily on this spot outside of injury. So I've kind of discounted Bamford for that reason. And then when you look at the fixtures between Toney and Isak, they're fairly similar, but I would just about give them to Brentford as being slightly better. You also know what you're getting with Toney. He's always going to be that number 9. He's definitely going to be on penalties. The same can't be said about Isak, especially when Wilson comes back. And also, the news is that Isak is having to leave the Sweden squad because he's injured. Now, that could be an international break injury, but it just puts another doubt on him from 9 onwards, and I think I would just pick Toney. So it just comes down to money for me. I think with Kane, it's not a bad choice to go with him because you've got that Everton at home fixture in Game Week 11, but I think you're pinning a lot on that game if you go for him this week. You could go for Mitrovic against Bournemouth, you could just go for Salah or Haaland, because in Game Week 9, 10 and 12, and probably even 13, Kane is not the best captain. I think in 9 and 10, Haaland is better. In 12 and 13, Salah is better. So I think you could have gone for Kane on a Game Week 8 wildcard. I don't think it's as good doing it in a Game Week 9 wildcard. So for me, it's between Toney and Solanke, and it's just as simple as this one. How much money do you have left? So from all the discussions I've seen so far this week, unless you're going 4 at the back, most people are having to choose to leave out one of these 4 defenders, right? That's the position that I'm in. So I'm going to talk about the situation and how I'm thinking about it right now. So Reece James is probably going to be the first defender in the squad. I think over the next 4 game weeks, his fixtures are as good, if not better than everyone else's. I expect him to still be just as attacking under Potter. 6 million is very good value. And if anything, I expect Chelsea to be better defensively under Potter than they were under Tuchel over the last few fixtures. Now, that might take some time to implement, but I think Reece James just offers so much upside, he's definitely going to be in. Then it's between Trent and Cancelo. Now, Man City defence is definitely better. I think if, and it's a big if, Matip and Thiago can stay fit, that will definitely improve that Liverpool defence. I'm certainly not put off going for Trent right now. And you look at the attacking numbers, expected goal involvement, Trent, although he's had a poor start to the season by his standards, still looks to be a little bit more attacking. So I think between the two, it's quite close. Then you you come on to fixtures, game weeks 9 and 10, you definitely give them to Cancelo. I think Brighton at home isn't that bad of a fixture, but Southampton at home is definitely better. And then Man United at home is easier than Arsenal away. Game week 11, they play each other, and obviously then Cancelo has the blank. So I could start with Cancelo and move to Trent Alexander-Arnold, but I'm thinking of going for both and actually dropping Trippier. Now, one of the reasons for that, I think I'm going to have 3 Arsenal Man City players, and they're going to be Martinelli, Haaland and Cancelo. And I think the way the squad is going to be set up and the way that blank is going to happen, I'm going to need to sell one. And with Cancelo, I've only made 0.1 million. With Haaland, he's gone up 0.5, and Martinelli's gone up 0.6. So I lose less money by selling Cancelo than I do selling the other two. And so that's why he is my preferred player to start with and then sell later on. So if I start with Trent, I don't need to worry about transferring him back in for the game week 12 onward fixtures. I've got him straight away. And if Liverpool do improve, I'll be slightly ahead of the curve on that. Because I think a lot of people are still kind of against Liverpool, which is fine. But I would rather be on them and then they do really well and then other people are scrambling rather than me scrambling later on when I'm on a wild card right now. So I then have Cancelo for Man United at home, Southampton at home. And then in game week 11, I've got a decision to make. If there's nothing else going on in my squad, I could make a luxury transfer of Cancelo to a Spurs defender who have Everton at home. And then in game week 12, look to bring in Trippier for Everton at home as well, and then take Trippier back out for Cancelo from game week 13 onwards. That's only if in game week 11 there's nothing else going on. If there is, I'll just keep Cancelo for Liverpool away. It's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. And then in game week 12, I'll make that switch instead. So I do think I'm going to have to switch out one of Cancelo, Martinelli and Haaland. And Cancelo right now is my preferred one to do that with. With Trippier, I do like him, but I think over the next 5 fixtures, Spurs away and Man United away are tricky, and I think Fulham away, I'm really hoping that Mitrovic scores, and if he does, I'm going to be very happy that I haven't got Trippier, and I can possibly get him back for game week 12 anyway. So the only fixture I'm really missing over the next 5 is that Brentford at home game in game week 10, and that week I've got James against Wolves, Cancelo against Southampton, and okay, Trent's got Arsenal away, but that's saving me a transfer down the line. So I think right now, given how the last few weeks have gone, most people are going Trippier, James and Cancelo, but I'm thinking about just getting out of the way straight away and having Trent, Cancelo, James in, dropping Trippier, which might mean no Newcastle defenders on game week 9, and just getting him in for that game week 12 fixture instead, because as much as I look at Cancelo just to round off and think he could concede against Man United and Liverpool, then he's got a blank, so you're only relying on the Southampton game, because of how good that Man City defence is and because of how attacking he can be, there's every chance that he gets a haul both in Southampton and one of the other games as well, and I'm just not sure I want to go without him. So right now, if I'm only going for 3, I'm considering dropping Trippier for those reasons I've just talked about. So I feel like I am a little bit of a broken record with Sterling at the moment, but is he an option even if going for 2 other premium attackers? So let's say you go for Haaland plus one of Kane, De Bruyne, Salah or Son. Could you also look to get Sterling in? Now, there's some people out there going with 3 premium attackers, so it's definitely viable. It just depends on how many sacrifices you're willing to make. Right? Are you happy to get Solanke in and not have one of Cancelo, Trent or James? Maybe you are, and if that's the case, you could go for Sterling. Definitely a very nice differential. The fixtures, I think, for Chelsea are probably, or maybe even arguably, slightly better for an attacker than they are for a defender. But at 10 million, I just find it very difficult to put him in my team, because the way I'm setting up with Salah, Madison, Zaha and Martinelli, I don't think I'll go for Bowen in the end. I'd have to find nearly 2 million to upgrade Zaha and Madison, who have really good fixtures themselves, to go for Sterling. And I'm just not going to captain him when I've got other options in my team. So for that reason, I'm probably not going to put him in. I don't want to put people off doing it, because I do think he's an extremely good attacker, right? He is Chelsea's best attacking player. His numbers have been really good. I expect that to continue under Potter as well. But for me, it's just too many sacrifices and compromises to fit him in right now. So lots of questions about how to deal with Arsenal and Man City players. What's the strategy with the game week 12 blank? So this is how I'm thinking about it right now. And I've kind of already alluded to this as I've gone through the other questions. So I'll probably go for 3 players maximum from both of these teams, and it will probably be Haaland, Cancelo and Martinelli. We might discuss about selling Martinelli in a future video, but I don't think it's something that I'm going to do. I think they are probably the 3 best ones. I think with Arsenal, you've got Spurs and Liverpool and a blank over the next 4 game weeks, so going for Jesus or a Saka or a defender, just not worth it. And with Man City, you've got to play Liverpool away in game week 11 and a blank in game week 12, so going for that extra defender or extra attacker, again, just doesn't seem worth it when there's other players you can kind of set and forget with better fixtures, like Zaha and Maddison, who I just spoke about. I do think ideally, unless you're willing to play Andreas Pereira and 2 of your backup defenders, you do sell one for the blank and then bring them back in. Because of the value that I have tied up in them, it might be different for you. I will probably sell Cancelo because I just lose less money than selling Martinelli or Haaland. If you're someone, for example, that didn't get on Haaland until late, so you bought him for like 11.9 or 12 million, you could sell Haaland in game week 11 for Kane and then reverse that move in game week 13. So Kane has Man United away in game week 12, which is not necessarily great, but it's still better than having no fixture for Haaland. So you could make that move, but for most of us that got on him at 11.5, it's tricky to do that because you lose the money. So that's how I'm kind of looking at it right now, and that's why I think Cancelo might be the easiest one to sell. And to be honest, having Trippier at home to Everton in game week 12 is pretty nice anyway. So it all just depends how much you value that Kane captaincy in game week 11, or are you happy just to go for Haaland or maybe Mitrovic instead? And obviously you need to think about game week 13 onwards. So I wouldn't say you want to get into a position where you're taking out like you're wildcarding like 2 or 3 Arsenal City players in, and then you're looking to remove at least 2 of them, because that's then 2 transfers if you want to bring them back without even thinking about everything else that you might want to do. So really think about how you're going to deal with game week 13 onwards, because they do both have really good fixtures. Okay, so Liverpool options. How many Liverpool players should we have on our Game Week 9 wildcard? Could we go without and bring them back in later? So you could definitely do that if you wanted to. You would just think about how you're going to do that and where the money is going to come from. So if we go back to that defender question, for example, if you went for Trippier, James and Cancelo as the 3 that you wanted to own from Game Week 9 onwards, and you wanted to get Trent in back later from Game Week 12 onwards, well, you could do Cancelo to Trent, but then because of Liverpool's fixtures, you're not going to want to reverse that move. So then you've got to find like over £1 million or more to upgrade Trippier or James. How are you going to get that money? Do you have enough transfers to do it? Are you willing to risk not having Cancelo or not having Reece James? If you are, then maybe that's how you figure it out. But that's something to think about. With Salah, you could do the same. So you could go with De Bruyne or Son, but I don't know if either of their fixture runs over the next kind of 3 to 4 are good enough to warrant not just having Salah from the start. So I would probably have at least one of these. If you think you're definitely going to want them later on, have at least one now. It's just going to be much easier to deal with. You don't want to leave multiple transfers needed to deal with these 2 when you could have other players to deal with at the same time. I think if you're not sure whether you want them later on, then you could go without. I think it's just easier to have them now. But it's not, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, it's not without its risks, because over the next 3 game weeks, they only have like one good game week, and that is Brighton at home, which hasn't been easy so far this season. If they don't do anything in that game, well, then it's Arsenal and then it's Man City. So then you're waiting until game week 12. And because you've put them both in the team and they're both quite expensive, you've had to make sacrifices elsewhere. You could end up losing points to the crowd. So it does feel like, at least in the first half of the season, this is a pretty pivotal moment. If you do go for both of them, you're ahead of the crowd. A lot of people obviously are just against Liverpool right now. They just don't think they're playing well. They're just not worth the money. And if it pays off, happy days, right? People will be scrambling to get them in. If they don't do well, then you've got an Arsenal fixture, then a Man City fixture. It's probably not going to get any better there. Then you're really waiting for Game Week 12 to get the returns. And then I wouldn't say the Game Week 9 wildcard has been wasted because you're still ahead on transfers, but it doesn't look quite as good. So I will definitely have both of them. So I don't want to deal with it later on. I would say at the minimum, I would have one. I'm not talking about Darwin Nunez either. I think the forward slots are too valuable to have someone that is a minutes risk. Jota and Firmino obviously fit at the moment as well. And Luis Diaz is good. And I could see myself maybe bringing him back in later from Game Week 12 onwards. But I think right now, given the fixtures aren't that easy for Liverpool, they're okay but not amazing. I think it's just better to use those slots on players like Maddison or Zaha instead. So there we go. That is a bunch of the key questions answered for Game Week 9 wildcards. If you enjoyed that video and you found it useful, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. If you're not on wildcard this week, don't panic. It's not just going to be wildcard content through the international break. I have got other stuff planned, so keep an eye out for that. Obviously, next week we'll have all the normal stuff, team selection, Game Week preview, transfer tips. But there's a bit more coming over this weekend again. So thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy that, give it a like, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon.